Imagine a man who could make a mirror seem quiet and a battlefield seem humane, who could raise a kitchen maid to the dignity of myth with a single, sure stroke. This is Diego Velázquez, the 17th century Spaniard whose paintings still stop us in our tracks. He painted kings and cooks, popes and peasants, gods and children, and he did it with a cool, exacting eye that never succumbed to mere flattery or facile drama. In one canvas, he places himself at work inside the royal palace. In another, he invites the ordinary to sit with the divine. Over the next 8.5 minutes, we will follow his life from Seville to the Spanish court and Rome, examine the brushstrokes that made him modern, and trace the quiet rebellions hidden inside his most famous pictures. Diego Rodríguez de Silva y Velázquez was born in Seville in 1599, a bustling port city rich with color, trade, and religious ritual. His childhood was ordinary in outward ways. A provincial upbringing, the smell of frying oil in taverns, the hush of altars at dusk. Yet Seville was an incubator for observation, theater, processions, and the everyday drama of market life. He apprenticed as a young teenager to Francisco Pacheco, a painter, theorist, and impresario whose studio taught the craft of drawing, composition, and the churchly vocabulary of religious painting. In 1618, Velázquez married Pacheco's daughter, Juana, a union that anchored him socially and artistically. The lessons he absorbed in Seville, fidelity to observation, respect for draftsmanship, a palette tempered by candlelight and sunlight, would remain the bones of his art even after he arrived at court. Pacheco supplied Velázquez with technical training and entry into networks of commission. But the young painter's curiosity reached beyond manuals. He studied the great Italian masters, classical sculpture, and the austere devotional images that dominated Spanish taste. Early religious works, crucifixions, madonnas, altarpieces, taught him how to compose in solemn registers of light and dark. That contrast between light and shadow is often called chiaroscuro, literally light-dark, an old tool he used not for melodrama but for clarity. He also absorbed the looseness of brushwork he observed in some Venetian painting and the sober realism of Flemish portraiture. These threads, draftsmanship, chiaroscuro, and painterly freedom, began to weave into Velázquez's distinctive voice. At about 24, he moved to Madrid and entered the orbit of King Philip IV. By the 1620s, he was a court painter, a role that demanded likenesses of royalty but allowed, surprisingly, broad experimentation. He painted the king in sumptuous costumes, cataloging power with the economy of his brush. His paintings of official success, The Surrender of Breda, where dignity replaces spectacle, show a moral imagination inside state portraiture. The conquered and the conqueror meet in a composition that celebrates humanity over humiliation. In the 1630s and 1640s, he produced genre scenes and mythological works that blurred social categories. The Triumph of Bacchus gives peasant laughter the scale of classical myth. The Rokeby Venus, a female nude seen in the mirror, refuses obvious erotic display and turns the viewer into a participant. He made memorable portraits of individual sitters too, courtiers, jesters, and the remarkable Juan de Pareja, a man whose portrait is an act of empathy and technical bravura. No single painting better condenses Velázquez's power than Las Meninas, painted in 1656 in Madrid. At first glance, it's a court scene. The Infanta, maids of honor, dwarfs, a dog, and the painter himself at the easel. But the picture is a carefully constructed puzzle about looking. Velázquez places himself inside the royal space, painting what could be a royal portrait, while at the back a mirror reflects the king and queen, outside the pictorial plane, yet inside the visual field. Who is looking at whom? The painting stages reflection, literally and metaphorically. Its brushwork is deceptively loose in places. Faces emerge from texture. The canvas is also a statement about truth in painting, authority, representation, the act of seeing. Late in life, Velázquez would bear the insignia of a knight, the Cross of Santiago, and Las Meninas subtly announces that social elevation without diminishing the mystery of art itself. Many interpret the picture as a manifesto, painting as a living social theater, and the artist as participant, not mere recorder. Velázquez's technique reads as economy and confidence. He often worked on canvas with a limited palette, building form with broad, decisive strokes. He used glazes, thin, transparent layers of paint to modulate color and depth, and at times applied paint more thickly. Impasto, meaning thick paint, appears sparingly, but to great effect where light needs to catch the surface. His stroke varies from fine modeling in faces to almost calligraphic daubs in garments and backgrounds. He trusted optical mixing, letting nearby colors vibrate rather than blending them obsessively on the palette. The result is a surface that rewards proximity. Up close, you see brush as gesture. At a distance, you see flesh and fabric become real. That tension between mark and illusion is what makes his later portraits feel alive today. Velázquez returned again and again to a few themes: the dignity of ordinary life, the quiet theatrics of the court, and myth recast in human scale. He painted religious subjects with restraint and mythological scenes with an almost anthropological eye. In the Triumph of Bacchus, peasants are not background props, they are the protagonists of celebration. In Las Hilanderas, the story of Arachne becomes a meditation on art and craft. Mirrors, reflections and paintings within paintings recur as devices that question reality and artifice. Portraits of fools and jesters are not mockery, but portraits saturated with presence. Symbolism in his work is rarely allegorical in the Baroque sense. It is moral and psychological, encoded in posture, gaze, and the handling of light. Velázquez's reputation was complicated. At court, he navigated privilege and politics. He was favored by Philip IV, but also worked under the pressures of royal expectation. Critics have argued over whether certain commissions were flattering or unflattering, and whether his Roman portraits, notably that of Pope Innocent X, captured likeness or caricature. His Rokeby Venus later became famous for reasons beyond painting when, centuries after it left his studio, it was attacked by a suffragette who saw it as a symbol, a reminder that Velázquez's work continued to provoke debate long after his death. During his lifetime, he was lauded for honesty and technical skill. After his death, he became a touchstone for modern painters who admired his brushwork and psychological acuity. The lineage of Velázquez's influence is long and surprising. Goya saw him as a model of psychological portraiture. Édouard Manet called him the painter of painters. Picasso produced an extended series of reinterpretations of Las Meninas. Those modernists seized on his looseness of touch and his refusal to idealize absolutely. Photographers and filmmakers have also looked to his compositions for lessons in staging and the ethics of looking. Crucially, Velázquez expanded what a court painter could be, a thinker about vision, not only a maker of flattering images. Today, his works remain studied for their interplay of truth and illusion, and for the way they insist that painting, at its best, is a way of seeing that changes us. A few quick surprises. Velázquez painted himself into Las Meninas, making the artist present inside his own masterpiece, an early cinematic flourish. He painted Juan de Pareja, who began life as his assistant and later emerged as a respected artist in his own right, and Velázquez exhibited that portrait in Rome and freed Pareja, a human story embedded in paint. The Rokeby Venus is shown from behind and reflected in a mirror, a composition that flips the conventional gaze. And the Triumph of Bacchus pairs classical myth with tipsy realism. Gods and drunks share the same breath. These little facts keep reminding us that Velázquez loved a paradox, combining grandeur with the everyday. Diego Velázquez left us a quiet revolution, a way of painting that trusts the eye and the world in equal measure. His canvases still argue with our expectations about power and humility, about who is worthy of attention, about what a painting can reveal when it refuses to shout. 30, 50, 400 years later, we stand before his work and we are taught anew how to look, not just at paint, but at people. In Velázquez, the royal and the ordinary meet. The brush becomes a voice, and the act of seeing becomes an ethical practice. That is why his pictures endure. They are at once mirrors and invitations, demanding that we recognize the humanity in what we look at.